maturity, and in some cases have known each other for a long time. So that this particular marriage preparation for you is to talk with people who are already doing what you want to do, right? And ask all those questions outside of the hearing of the priest so that you can, because I think it's much more realistic. And so generally we ask two couples from the parish who are part of our marriage prep team to participate with us. And so Joseph and Karen have agreed to do that for us. I married Joseph and Karen, when was that? I don't even know, right? It's right, when?
June.
In June,
Yeah.
so in June. So
We're
Joseph,
newlyweds.
they're newlyweds. So Joseph has gotten out of a sick bed to come here with you. And then our other couple was Stephanie and Megan, and they're young, they have twin girls, and Dylan got a fever. So they're going to stay home with Dylan. So it's Joe and Karen. So it'll be Joe and Karen.
They'll
so,
be good.
Yeah, they'll be good. So they'll be good. And then and I'll explain what that's about in the part of the day, right? Is that okay? So yeah, I appreciate you coming out in this weather too. It feels like this snow is relentless. Huh? It's just never. I did my theology at the Pontifical College at the University of Toronto, and we didn't even have this much snow in the 4 years that I was up there. So this is amazing. This is amazing. Let's begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Almighty God, we ask you to be here with us today as we gently move through this day with each other. Guide us, direct our hearts to greater acts of love towards each other and you. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So you're all here for fire and safety, right? Yeah. So, I think everybody knows me, but you probably don't know each other. So can you? And by the way, this is you'll get to know each other. It's a very relaxed day. There's no tests. There's no exams. As I was saying to Danielle, the first test to see if you should get married is how you help each other over the snow piles getting in here, right? So that would be the first test. But I want you to relax. And in all honesty, this is the day to ask any questions that you need to. I'm a former professor of psychiatry and mental health, and I would say to my students, the only stupid question is what? The one you don't ask, and that's really true. So ask anything that you want, right? So what I'd like to do is just introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, where you're from, and where you're getting married. How's that? Do we go here?
Stand up.
If you want, sure.
I'm Gary. I live right in Bloomfield, probably 3 blocks. So it wasn't tough to get here. I'm a teacher in Patterson. I teach autistic children. I just started attending this parish probably October and really enjoying that. And this is my fiancée, Tricia.
Hi, I'm Tricia. Live in Bloomfield too, live with you. And I'm a graphic designer, freelance.
That's good. And when are you getting married?
Oh, we're getting married May 17th, so not too far away. And it's slightly freaking out.
And Patricia and Gary are getting married here at the parish church,
Oh, yeah.
which is nice.
Yeah,
So it's very nice. It's really very nice. Yeah, and Gary's, they're very active members of our parish, so I'm really glad for that, right? So welcome. Actually, Brother Gigi is going to officiate at their wedding. So very nice, very nice.
Okay, well, Joe DeLucio, we've been coming to this parish now from about a year, from last February. We got married in June by Bishop George when we were looking for someone to perform the ceremony. Was how we ended up here. And we've become fairly active in the parish. And last year we joined electors.
Once he marries you, it's over.
Well,
You go to
he'll
work.
tell you, you come here twice, he puts you to work.
It's really true. And even before you're married. So,
Yeah.
right? Because if we see you twice here, we put you to work, just so you know. And Karen and Joseph and Patricia and Gary, actually that's true. If you come to St. Francis, we really want you to get involved. And so we get you pretty, we look for your talents, but even if you don't have them, we ask you to do stuff. So anyway, so I appreciate it. We're a small parish, but we're very lively and very active in the community. So we met Patricia and Gary actually at the Bloomfield Festival. So our parish is there. So thank you. And it's really true. If we see you more than once, look out, right? So that's good. Thank you.
No, go ahead.
No? Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Oh my
I'm
God.
Karen.
I live in Marlboro.
I'm so sorry, I'm really so sorry, Karen.
Hi, I'm Claudia, and we are new to St. Francis, very new. Actually, we live an hour and a half away in Bayville. And we came to find Father George through my fiance's twin sister, Darlene, and her now wife, Judy. And because Father George married them as well, so 2.5 years now.
So they're still married, it works.
And our wedding date is 12, 13, 14.
Wow.
Very lucky in Old Bridge.
That's all you're gonna say? All right, very good. I married Donna's sister Judy, it was 2 years ago, I guess, right? So it's very nice. Good. Thank you so much.
So I'm Danielle, and this is my fiance Joey. We're from Allendale, so we're a ways up. We're getting married at Corona Farms in Andover, 10, 12, 14. So explain it to you 12, 13, 14. I'm a pre-K teacher. I teach students with behavioral disabilities. So I have 7 little boys in my class.
Wow.
And I'm Joey, and I actually I work, I'm a manager at a nursery up in Allendale, Roslers, and I've been out all night playing. So it's been rough with the weather and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been dating for almost 10 years, and we got engaged last year, and we're looking forward to it.
Nice job. And if you fall asleep, that's all right.
Yeah.
We'll perfectly understand. Perfectly understand. Welcome. Thanks for doing the plowing.
No,
right?
we tried our best, yeah. So, it's 29 hours.
Allendale?
Allendale, New Jersey, yeah.
Where is that?
By Ramsey, Mawa, up through 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Joe? Is that by you?
North, no, we're south.
Oh.
That's up to the
All right,
first.
so, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So we can start an IV of caffeine if you need.
Absolutely, I see it over there, yeah, we're just gonna keep doing it.
It's, very nice, very nice. Thank you.
No problem, thank you.
I'm Danielle, and this is my fiance Derek. We've been together for 6 years now. We're getting married in May. We live in Freehold, so we're close to you, and I'm a first grade teacher.
For a lot of teachers.
And I work for GE in Scotland, New York.
In like finance and operations, so it's like totally different.
So it
But we
works.
still talk about it.
It works.
Yeah.
And when are you getting married?
We're getting married May 25th.
May 25th.
My parents' 39th wedding anniversary, which is why we chose it at the Pleasantdale Chef's House.
I was saying to Danielle, she looks so much like my niece, so I have to be careful because I'm gonna want to tease her like I tease my niece.
I can handle it.
All right, good. Thank you, welcome.
My name is Drew, and this is my fiancee Andrea. We're getting married in May. We're from Aberdeen, New Jersey, so close to everybody. I'm in finance. I work as a bond trader.
And we're actually getting married May 17th, the same day as you. And we're getting married on my parents' anniversary, so it's just funny that both those things came up. And I work for my family business, it's construction. And that's about it.
Very nice. Great, that's good. How long have you been together?
5 years.
5 years? 5
Almost.
years? Yeah, okay.
So I'm Jackie, this is my fiance Scott. We just moved to Summit from Manhattan 2 weeks ago. I work for Tory Burch, and Scott's an architect. We're getting married in June at Bonnet Island. in Montana. Yeah, June 20th.
Very nice. How long have you guys been?
3 years.
3 years? 3 years? Great. And you just moved to Summit?
Yeah.
Wow. So
2
that's
weeks
a-
ago.
just in
in
time
a
for-
snowstorm.
We're there.
Right.
Perfect timing, right? Perfect timing. It's a nice little town, Summit, right? It's a nice town. I used to work in Summit, actually. I didn't know, like, Summit, it's a nice little, to work in a hospital over there. So this is interesting. So 3 years?
Yeah.
5 years? How long?
6.
6 years?
10.
10 years? 4?
10.
10? 6. Well, this is very interesting. I mean, the reason I'm asking is I think I knew this but generally people who come to find us at St. Francis have been together for a long time. There's a sense of emotional maturity, I think, that you bring with each other, right? And so the idea that you kind of work some of the issues out throughout the length of your relationship together, that's pretty good. That's really pretty good. Psychologically, that bodes well, right? So that, you know, psychological studies usually end in 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, right? So 1/3 it really bodes well for, 1/3 not so well for, and 1/3 it doesn't do anything for, right? So in many ways. But what I think is that what happens is that you as I think any relationship grows in time, you become more accepting and tolerant of yourselves and the other in that relationship, and then it really does bode well. I guess the thing that you would what I would caution is that because of the length of time you've been together, you may take each other for granted. So you have to be careful with that, I think, right? You have to be a little careful with that, right? So good, very good. How should we begin? What's a good way for us to begin? Well, I have some ideas, but I'd like to ask you first. I always ask that because I think one of the things that, let me ask you this, maybe this is a good way for us to begin in a sense. How is it that you have either found us at St. Francis or have come to ask us at St. Francis to officiate at your wedding? Yeah.
Well, Trish found you at the street fair.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Don't say that too loud.
both of us have been raised sort of have on and off through the
Huh?
church, and both of us have been wanting to get back to having a sense of purpose.
Okay.
So going to church has always been in the back of our mind. Getting married has propelled us
Uh-huh.
to find somewhere to get married. But I wanted to find somewhere that was open-minded and welcoming and not so structured. Like, I didn't want to get married really strict, like, you know,
Mhm.
stuff. So I was looking around and I found you at the street fair, and it was so great and gracious and wonderful, and we started coming, and that's why, because we want presence of spirituality in our relationship.
Okay. Oh,
It was always there.
good. Right. Exactly. Right.
We discussed it a lot.
Yeah.
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 But we now that we've become part of the congregation, it's definitely
Yeah.
makes more sense to us getting married here too.
Very good. Very
More
good.
significant.
Yeah, because it's meaningful. It's meaningful.
Yeah.
It has always been meaningful.
Yeah.
But then finding the place creates or gives it a more intensity of meaning, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely, very good. So there's something interesting, I think, in what Patricia's saying. I just want to hear some other responses. What other reasons that you came to St. Francis? Anybody? Sorry. Really, everything's okay. It's really all right, right? Okay, good.
Well, we've been together for quite a while. We decided to get married, and Karen had been married before, but not in the church. But I had never been married, so I waited 59 years to do this. So I wanted to have a Catholic wedding, and we could have jumped through a bunch of hoops probably and done it in the Roman Catholic Church, but because she had been married, even though they didn't recognize the marriage, because she had a divorce, it would have been a whole bunch of things we had to go through. We would have had to wait a lot longer to do it. We made up our mind we wanted to get married last May, June time frame. And so I started looking for someone. I found George on the internet. I was raised in a Franciscan parish, and I like that part too.
Yeah.
And that's, I gave that with them. The rest is history.
So there's something a little bit that I'm hearing, that there's something about looking for a place in which maybe the regulations are a little not as restrictive,
So I
right?
think you said to us the first time we sat down, sitting right here in these chairs, and maybe you just said, your job is to divide priests, not to give the sacraments. Your job is to make the sacraments available to us.
Exactly.
And then
Exactly.
I said, okay, we're split.
And that's very true. And that's very true. And that's what I'm looking for here in many ways, because what I want to say to you is these sacraments have always belonged to you. These are not anything that you have to kind of beg and grovel for. Does that make sense? And so, by the way, we're all former Roman Catholic. I say former Roman Catholic. We really don't consider ourselves any less Catholic. Sometimes they get mad at us, but who cares, right? So that's what I figure, right? Because they're bigger than us, we're not going to fight with them. But the reality is that I want you to know that what brought you here, all what happens to us, what attracted you to each other, what attracts you here is desire. And desire, in that sense, comes from God in many ways, right? Our ability to love. We say that our origin and our capacity for love resides in God. And so that all love is fruitful, and so then we search out the other. And so that's what I'm looking for a little bit. What brought you here? What made you want to? Because by the way, in New Jersey, you can have anybody married, right? Right? So
the diversity of the church.
Yeah.
Just
The diversity.
And the acceptance.
And the acceptance, right? Because all of us want to be more than tolerated, right? We want to be welcomed the way that I think Jesus welcomed us all with open arms, right? We do a lot of baptisms here at St. Francis, as everybody knows, right? And I sometimes weary the congregation with that. But at the baptism of John, we heard God the Father say, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And every time we baptize someone here, we hear God say that. "You are my beloved children in whom I am well pleased." We have a God who delights in us. And so that has always been the message of the heart of the Catholic Church. That has always been the message.
I was raised Roman Catholic and I was attended a Second Reformed church. So we were looking for something that was more accepting, not a traditional Roman Catholic wedding where we were going to have to jump through hoops to be married in the parish. So.
Yeah, nice. That's funny, Second Reformed, not even First Reformed.
Right.
Right? So,
They say you're reformed from what?
Yeah. But that's nice though, right? But it may say something about the idea that we as a people of God have always been trying to find ways to make our relationship different, and so reformations happen in many ways, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Very nice, Joey. Very good. Good. How about you guys up here? How about you?
Actually, for the same reason, I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church. Scott was baptized, but really wasn't very active, and it was important to me.
Yeah.
But I
You know all the spiritual aspects of Catholicism without all the mess.
Yeah. But that's true.
And I think what you said about the diversity of this room versus
Yeah.
Roman Catholic Church, I
It
think
says
it's
us
important
who
to
we
go
are and
across.
what we do.
Yeah.
Because that's how God receives us always, right? And it's true, Scott, what you say in a sense that the Spirit, the Holy Spirit which dwells in the heart of the church is really always about encouraging us to be who God created us to be, right? And who God informed us to be. The moral authority of the church is to help inform our conscience. It isn't to tell us what to do, right? Absolutely. Good. All right, good.
Drew and I were both raised Roman Catholic, and I think throughout our relationship, we thought we would get married in one of our parishes from when we were children, because we still are both live in the area. And but then we found our venue down at the Mount Island Yacht Club, and we really loved the chapel there. And we said, "Oh, we'd really love to get married here." We weren't sure how that would go over with our families, and it turned out our families were really for it. So then we had to look into, well, how can we do this in a way that's still true to our faith? And actually, Erin, who used to work at the yacht club, recommended you, and we looked up some of the videos, and we researched you a bit, and then we came here to Mass, and we said, wow, this is actually a better fit than if we were to get married in one of our childhood churches, because we really felt like this is natural, and I think it couldn't have worked out any better.
And I married Erin, so I married her, and I just married her mother.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah. Her mother was married before, so but she had her. That's why I don't want to, right? So so it's really nice. So very nice.
Just funny how things work out. That
It's true.
somebody can point you in a direction, and then the direction actually works for you.
It's true.
And
isn't it?
I think we haven't looked back. We're happy.
And it's interesting too, is in many cases it's not you as the bride and groom, but sometimes it's your families, right? And so I always encourage you to bring them, but in many ways I think, me too, sometimes we don't trust our families to love us enough to say, God, do this, right? If it makes you happy, right? So, yeah, absolutely, which is wonderful, right? So they're pleased with that. I'm glad. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I was nervous, my family was.
And then I was nervous that I thought his family would think that this was me driven, and so we were a little apprehensive to tell. My mom was completely on board, so that kind of eased my family into it.
Yeah.
But I thought that his family would just think like, well, what is Andrew doing to him, and having him get married in a chapel on the water and not in our home church. But it got really well received by everyone when we started to explain how positive an experience meeting you was, and how we really feel like it's the best decision for us and for
Good.
our ceremony.
Good. Good. Absolutely.
It also helped we broke into my family at the birthday party.
So
They were very accepting of it.
did you say an 80th?
80th.
Oh, there you
My
go.
grandmother's 80th birthday, we told the whole group, because we had them all there at one time, so everybody's very excited about it.
Good.
And that makes it so much easier when the families accept, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I heard when Andrea said that, I heard a lot of affirmation, right? And they thought that the family, because that's part of what I think you all as couples need to talk about. I encourage you to have your own wedding, but your families have some agenda for that as well, right? Often so, right? So it's really true, right? Yeah. So you have to kind of, what I usually encourage people is probably, people want to help you with everything. They want to do your hair and pick your gown out and those kinds of things. Have them do a reading at your wedding, and they'll remember forever, right? So put them to work. That's the gift of the Catholic Church. If you put somebody to work, it distracts them a little. So that's good. So I'm glad that worked out. Danielle and good.
We actually went to the same school, kindergarten through senior year of high school, Catholic school. And we also received all of our sacraments at the same church, baptism till confirmation. However, a lot's happened to us in the past 6 years, and our faith has gotten us through it. And my family and I were constantly in church and very by the book. And Derek's family was more, see it as you believe in it as you go. But together, your mom was definitely, I made you find more like your spirituality and your faith. So together we've grown to be very faith-based. However, because of some of the things that happened to us, we weren't sure exactly if getting married in the Roman Catholic Church was the best thing for us. So after speaking to someone who we've known for a couple of years, I spoke to her and she recommended me to you. So then I called you in September and then I blew you off. And when I called you back in December, you told me to pray on it.
Yeah.
So after we both prayed on it and thought about it and met with you, we definitely knew that having you marry us outside in a very peaceful and spiritual setting was the best thing for us to do. So we're very thankful and grateful. And both of our families are extremely fine with whatever we think is best for this day.
Good. Very nice. So you've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Both of our older sisters graduated 8th grade in high school. We've been breathing the same air for quite some time. And we actually grew up like a couple blocks away from one another. But we didn't actually get to actually know each other until 6 years ago.
Right.
So it was one of those things. Because Derek's 3 years older.
Wow. You have a whole history together. Well, good, because that leads me to a little bit, all of what you have shared with me. I think the thing that I'm hearing a little bit, and just so you know, right, is that, by the way, most of us, at least in the United States, are exposed or grow up Roman Catholic. And Rome is the adjective. And so I want you to know this, and that we are these are canon law terms, we are validly Catholic. So valid means that we use all the correct form and matter and intent. And there's a phrase in theology we call ecclesia supplex. So what is ever lacking, the church provides. So there's another principle called the opus operandi, so that no matter what my particular state is, even if I'm in the depths of some mortal sin, it doesn't affect the grace which flows to you from the sacrament. So just so you know that, right? But I'm not, anyway. So just so you know that. But what I'm hearing is the importance of inviting God into your relationship either from a growth in your own history with the institutional church, or as you have developed your own spirituality, and that's really true. And so the traditions of the Catholic Church that you and I have grown up with, the traditions with a capital T, speak to us in some way about the presence of God in our life. And for us as Catholics, a little different than other traditions, is our whole life happens up and down this aisle. Our 7 sacraments are given to us at moments in our life to surround us and to remind us with all of our senses of the physical presence of God in our life. And so I want you to know this, is that as we move forward with each other, and that one of the things about, I think unfortunately about the Catholic Church as we experience it today, is probably over the last 40 years until this current pontiff, there has been a steady, intentional movement to change the reforms that occurred at Vatican Council II. Many of you are too young to remember the Latin Church. I grew up in the Latin Church, and it was a beautiful liturgy. It was wonderful. My folks are from, their roots are in Ireland, and so they were largely educated maybe to the 5th grade and certainly didn't speak Latin. So when they came to Mass, they'd bring their rosaries and they'd tell their beads all through Mass because they didn't really know what was happening other than when the priest said, Dominus vobiscum, and they could respond, Ecum spiritu tuo, right? Or intro illo ad altare Dei. And so that the liturgy of the church was beautiful. It highlighted the inaccessibility of God. And so at Vatican Council II, as at the Council of Trent, the church was an attempt to restore the church back to the people of God. And so we began having the Mass in the vernacular. And then probably more common, since the Eucharist represents the meal that Christ shared with those he loved, we faced the people and those elements. And so that was a wonderful movement in the church that we were all very excited about. I remember I was in minor seminary then when all these changes happened, and the nuns started to show their hair, which we didn't even think they had. And sometimes we weren't even sure they had legs because we could only see, right? But it was this humanizing of the church in many ways. But it was this, I think it was this recognition that in that place and time, God was speaking and inviting us back, much the way that Jesus did with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, reminding them over and over and over again to not lose the forest for the trees, not get so bound up. In the Latin Mass, if you were ordained, there were 150 ways the priest could have committed a mortal sin. Could you imagine? By not holding his hands in the correct position. How rigid could one be, right? At the gift of God's love to us. So just so you know, so that the American National Catholic Church is not in opposition to the Roman Catholic Church at all. We as a matter of fact, we see ourselves as a jurisdiction of Catholicism. The Catholic world is comprised of Rome, Antioch, Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. Those are the 5 Catholic churches. Each of those has a patriarch or a pope. And so the Coptic Rite, for example, they have, I think he just died, Pope Shenandoah. The Eastern Orthodox, which is located in Constantinople, which is what now? What is Istanbul, right? Thank you, right? And then the Russian Patriarch, which is in St. Petersburg. Those all have and for you and I, the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed that we say at Mass every Sunday was defined at the First and Second Council of Constantinople, First and Second Council of Nicaea. Constantine did the worst thing that could have ever happened to the Catholic faith. He made it the official state religion. And once he co-opted it, right? Once he gave it that kind of notoriety in the world, then the government backed the religion. So anyone else who was in opposition to that was history, right? And so Constantine moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople in 313, and he left a power vacuum in Rome. And so what happened was the bishops filled that power vacuum, and then they began to create an empire, so that the other 4 churches remained as genuinely Catholic as Rome. However, they were smaller and less centralized, so that the Eastern churches are called autocephalous, meaning that they have their own heads in different places, their own bishops. Rome, very much the way the Roman Empire did, began to centralize the authority of the church in the city of Rome. And so what happened from that then is flowed these directives that everybody had to do what everybody else was doing. So the very first code of canon law was at the probably after the Council of Trent, and it was not revised until it was codified probably at Pius XII around maybe 1872, and then it was redefined in 1982, recodified in 1982. And it's about, the Code of Canon Law is about 300 pages in the Western Church. In the Eastern churches, it's 17 pages, because they believe much more in the Holy Spirit moving through the church, right? And so I want you to know that we in the American National Catholic Church accept fully the doctrine and the theology of the Catholic Church, the historic Catholic Church as defined over time. And we accept fully all of those teachings. However, we interpret them a little differently. We interpret them according to the rule of love that was established in the church and was reaffirmed at Vatican Council II. So that when you say that you don't have to jump through any hoops here at St. Francis, what we hope that we hear is that what you experience here is what you would have experienced in the Church of Vatican Council II, what you would have experienced in the primitive church. That if you ask sincerely for these sacraments, then they're given to you, and there aren't any hoops that you have to jump through. There really aren't. God's love for us is unconditional, and it is extravagant, and it's not a quid pro quo. You do this and you get that. That's never been the teachings of the Catholic Church. That has happened over these 40 years, but it has never been the teachings of the Catholic Church. The rules that we follow, we do that not from obligation as much as from love, right? So you're going to get married to each other and you're going to live in a monogamous relationship with each other, right? Are you going to do that because you have to by law, or are you going to do that because you love each other? Right? So what you do out of love has, I think, greater impact, right? So will you be socially acceptable? Clearly, right? But not because of that, right? But because your love binds you together. That's the deal, right? That's the deal. That has always been the message. The Catholic Church is that church which was founded from the blood and water that flowed from the side of Christ. And so that great act of love created the church. And so over time and in different places, each person, each group has made meaning of that, right? And so over time, given the cultural influences of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church began to impose Roman imperial law on the theology. So then you get things like annulments, or you get things like marriage contracts, or you get things like, if you want your child baptized, the godparents have to be Catholics in good standing. What does that mean? What does that mean, right? Choose people who you admire that you would like your children to be like, right? Right? Because how many of us know good Catholics that when they leave church are the first ones to gossip about the person in front of them, right? Absolutely, right? So I know many good Catholics, right? And I don't want to be around them in many ways, right? So this idea that what you have come here hopefully to find in St. Francis is some element of that all-inclusive and accepting love of God, which has always been at the heart of the Catholic Church. And so even the Roman Catholic Church, right? And there's, by the way, some of this stuff that's going on there, I think, is how the church has lost sight of its meaning and purpose. If I'm too worried about the resources, then I'm not going to pay attention to the people of God, right? I'm not going to pay attention to someone who's getting abused, or someone who's, because I'm afraid you're going to sue me. Who cares, right? The reality is that Christ has a preferential option for the poor. Christ always chooses. What that means is Christ always chooses to be with the poor. And so the church in its existence should identify itself with the most vulnerable of society. And instead what it does is it protects itself, right? And that's why we're seeing all of this. I think it's lost a little bit of that, right? Janis Joplin said freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose, right? So if we have nothing left to lose, then we can be free. We can engage God with all of who we are. So I want you to know that's a long way of saying that the American National Catholic Church, in which you're becoming part of, or unless you're receiving the sacrament, not becoming part. It doesn't make you heretics. It doesn't excommunicate you. It doesn't do any of that. Your children cannot be refused baptism in the Roman Catholic Church, just so you know that, right? And so I want you to know that, and that you will be married with a Catholic ceremony that is valid. What they say is valid, but is illicit. And there's a priest up in Montclair, Immaculate Conception Parish, and everybody was asking about St. Francis, so he had to write a little blurb in the bulletin. Monsignor Shapiro, he's a great guy. So he wrote a blurb. He wouldn't call us a parish. He said St. Francis Center is a valid Catholic center, not in union with Rome. And so if you go there for Mass, you don't meet your Sunday obligation. Right? And so I called him up to thank him for getting it right, that we are valid. And I think he thought I was going to fight with him. And I said, Monsignor, no, I just wanted to thank you. And he said, yes. He said, but you're valid, but you're still illicit. And I said, oh, we've been called worse than that. So that much we'll live with. That much we'll live with. But what I said to Danielle is that you have to pray about this. Because, and this is true, if you want this to be recognized by Rome, then you have to do what Rome wants you to do. And they do have their own set of laws around that, right? One of the reasons, just so you know, at the Council of Trent, which was the Counter-Reformation, in the 1500s, Luther and John Calvin and William Tyndale all had some issues with the church in terms of centralizing its authority in Rome, and some abuses, which we all recognize, right? They were selling indulgences. They were selling ways to get out of purgatory, right? And so they were making a lot of money. And so Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk, and he was quite bright. And he said, "Yeah."
Wasn't that the finance?
The building of Rome. Yeah, it was by St. Peter's. Absolutely, it was that. There's been several aggressive popes, just so you know, who had their own armies, and if you didn't cough the money up, then other things would happen. Just so you know, Alexander being one of them. So absolutely, Gary. So what was happening is that people, it's called a differentiation of consciousness. People were beginning to recognize that there's something about this that doesn't feel like this is something that Christ would be doing, right? And so they began what I think they were hoping for was a dialogue. But there is no dialogue sometimes with people, and so they got immediately labeled heretics. And if you were outside of the Roman Church in the Middle Ages, you were dead, right? So, I mean, there was just you couldn't argue, it was a really probably scary place to be. So what happened is that actually it worked out in some ways. In Germany, there were some principalities that were upset with Rome as well, the Holy Roman Empire, so they backed Luther. And so the Diet of Worms was an attempt to make peace so that the principalities could choose either to be Lutheran or Catholic. But Luther was protected by some of these princes because they were upset with Rome. And so that's what saved the Reformation in many ways. And then in 1999, the Roman Catholic Church finally reconciled with Luther. Can you imagine? It took that long to recognize that Luther was right, that we are not saved by any of our own works, but both of those things have to be together. It's interesting that the church never tries to jump the gun, right? It took about 600 years to forgive Galileo, right? So anyways, right? So this idea that, so what happened is that at Trent, which was the Counter-Reformation, the church finally stabilized what we have come to know as our predominant theology. So that at that council, the 7 sacraments were defined. Up until that point, the crowning of a king and queen were considered a sacrament. But if the sacraments are for the entire people of God, not everybody could be crowned king or queen, right? So it couldn't be a sacrament. So what happened is during the Reformation, not so much from the Lutheran perspective, but from the Calvin, which eventuated in the Presbyterian Church as we know it now, there were serious questions about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. So the church redefined that, and at that council, with the help of Thomas Aquinas, we came to understand the mystery of the sacrament through transubstantiation. So what the church said is that this is such an important dimension of our life that no sacraments can happen outside of the presence of the Eucharist. which is why most Roman Catholics won't marry you outside of the church. That you have to have, and so it runs a little counter to us as Catholics in the sense that we see some element of God in all creation. We're not pantheists. It doesn't mean that a tree is God, but the beauty of that tree reflects some dimension of God, right? And so that we in the American National Catholic Church fully accept the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that God only dwells in the temple, right? So that's why we don't have these issues with marrying you outside. Does that make sense? Right? And because you're getting married here at the Parish Church of St. Francis of Assisi, all of us as Christians are saved in community. We're registering you in the Parish Church of St. Francis. Your wedding will be registered here, right? So that when anybody wants to see where you were married, it will say St. Francis of Assisi, American National Catholic Church, right? So that you have a sense of belonging to a community, right? Does that make sense? Is this too much, or is this like you want to shut up? Right? So, but I want to explain to you how we arrive at this. It is thoughtful. We're not just in opposition to something, right? Does that make sense? Because I think anything that's in opposition to something isn't going to last very long, right? We are really in an attempt, a community that tries to move forward the reforms of Vatican Council II that had said to us at that moment, this church belongs to you. So that when you feel welcome and accepted here, that has everything to do with the character of who we understand Christ to be for us, right? That in our Christology and our understanding of the person of Jesus Christ, both human and divine, it is that donation of God, that self-donation of God to the world that invites you and I to experience each other as sisters and brothers through the sacraments of baptism, related to each other in loving ways. Does that make sense? And so the sacrament of marriage, as it's understood, is that sacrament which provides you with the graces to move from the single state of life to your vocation to the married state of life. And all of our vocations God gives to us, and our ascent to them then is our path to holiness, because we enter then into what is the will of God for us. And so what happens at the sacrament, which is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace, you are surrounded then with the graces to support you all the rest of your married days. And that it's your job then is to make that grace available to yourselves through prayer and through participation in the life of Christ through the community of God's church. Does that make sense? And you're always welcome here, by the way, even though you come in, many of you come from a distance, right? So that's, and by the way, the history of marriage, the sacrament of marriage anyway, it was not always a sacrament. And so the differentiation of consciousness is a principle in theology, that what is ever true for a believing community will always find itself as true in each subsequent community, not in an anachronistic way, but in a way in which that community finds meaning. So the Eucharist, which is Christ's meal of love for us, always has been true for us as a believing community, and it has found its expression in every generation as meaningful, but in a way in which that generation can understand it. Does that make sense? So moving from the Latin to the, right, I visited a very Orthodox, traditional Catholic church in North Caldwell. And they're not affiliated with Rome. They're part of the Tridentine movement, and the Tridentine movement insists that the Mass can only be celebrated in Latin, and it can only be done in a certain form. And a wonderful elderly woman opened the door for me because I thought it was locked. The church was locked. It was locked, and she let me in. Her name was Teresa. She was wonderful, and I didn't have my habit on. I didn't identify who I was or anything like that. And she was showing me all around, and it was the church I grew up with. There was a small church chapel like this, but there were 3 altars, there was Stations of the Cross, there was a confessional, and all of that. And it's true, right? All of those are still meaningful to us, for sure, right? And so as I was talking to her, I was chatting with her, I was saying, well, what do you do? And she said, well, we say Mass here in Latin exactly the way Jesus did it. And I'm thinking, Jesus didn't speak Latin. Like, no, Jesus spoke Aramaic and maybe Greek, right? And so the Mass that Jesus celebrated was the Passover meal of the Jews. It was the celebration of God's liberating the people of Israel from oppression, of slavery, right? And so, but I thought to myself, this is where people get stuck in this stuff, right? This is not a meaningful expression any longer, right? But that you've been told that this is how Jesus said Mass, that's a little scary, right? So that this understanding of what all of you, by the way, you're somewhat of missionaries. You're a little bit in the vanguard in that you have come here recognizing some element of truth that has always resided with you about your knowledge of God. That some of the things that we do don't make any sense. And so that God's love extends beyond those boundaries. And it takes courage to do this. Courage in the Latin comes from coragere. It means to move your heart. And so it takes great courage to do what you're doing, right? And to stand in the midst of the people who we love in that community who recognizes this and say, this as meaningful and as valid to me as any other sacrament. So good for you. You probably didn't know that, right? But now you do, right? So the history of marriage, by the way, if we were here, and we wouldn't be, I think in the 10th century, the church wouldn't even marry you in here. You'd have to stand on the doorstep. They wouldn't let you in. You would have to stand on the doorstep. That's why we have bride porches, because they wouldn't let you in. And it really wasn't until the Counter-Reformation that the church began to say that the only place that marriage can take place is in the building of the church. So it's really interesting. There's a book called Roma Locutus Est. And whenever you want to settle an argument theologically, you say Roma Locutus Est. Rome has spoken. And there's a book that's about 3 inches thick of all the times Rome has spoken on the same issues. So Roma Locutus Est. However, so just so you know, and I really do mean this, we have a wonderful kind of parish here, and we're really not in opposition to anyone, and we don't fight or argue. It's just what we see ourselves as Catholic and a little bit more progressively Catholic, and we haven't changed the Mass. Right, so you can say the Lord be with you and also with you. We don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about with consubstantial, right? So in the creed, when consubstantial is nobody bothers to explain it, but homoousios in Greek means of the same substance, and so that's an important definition. Just so you know, in the 4th century, people were killing each other over the definition of the Trinity. They would get into wars, and so that's why Constantine forced the Council of Nicaea, so that the faith would be defined. So homoousios in Greek means substance. When it gets translated into the Latin, substance has a completely different meaning. So to say something is consubstantial requires a whole lesson in Greek philosophy that no one ever gives you. So for us, if we say of the same substance, that's probably the closer meaning. It is of the same substance. The Holy Spirit is called the Filioque. So anyway. So what else? Other questions? I don't even know where we are with time, but you didn't even ask any questions. I just kind of took off, huh? So is this meaningful for you? Is this helpful? You're all nodding along. You don't have to, right? So am I keeping you up, Joe?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I guess part of what I wanted to do is recognize why you came to us and asked us to do this with you, and we're happy to do it. We love doing it, by the way. Our parish, there's Father Joe, myself, Father Kevin, Father Carol, Father Vincent, Father Paul. There's about 6 priests here, all former Roman Catholic. 2 of them have a parish in Harrison, New Jersey, and then we have a parish in Long Branch, and then we have 2 parishes in Pennsylvania. And so we're growing. The American National Catholic Church has established itself, and we have more, but just in this area there's 5. So you won't, if you travel somewhere, you won't find the American National Catholic Church, but we would encourage you to help us start one. So just so you know, right? So other questions about that though? Are you feeling more comfortable? Are you feeling not that you needed to feel more comfortable. Most of you seem to recognize that, right? But other questions that you might have? I just want you to know that you're part of the. What does Catholic mean from the Greek?
Universal.
Universal, right? So you're part of the universal church, and that you're not doing anything that would put you outside of that, right? But St. Paul reminds us that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Absolutely not even ourselves, right? So other things, other questions, other things. And ask away, please. Yeah, Gary.
It's something I always want to know. A lot of the hoops and things that you said we have to jump through, is that origin come from the fall of the Roman Empire, and that the church was sort of the last institution? Okay, during the Dark Ages, the church was the last institution.
Yeah.
Kind of like what we would call the UN now, or the world government.
Yeah.
So, I used to talk to my Western Civ professor, used to say that a lot of those rules came out of, well, the church saw the fall of the Roman Empire and did not want to repeat that.
It's true.
So a lot of these really
Sure, sure.
strict
Yeah.
laws came out of that. And that almost that the church had to kind of be the world
Mhm.
government. And he mentioned things like, bad things like the Inquisition and all those things were.
Right.
But it was part of the fact that they had to
Right.
instill
Cut off
the law.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Is that?
It's very true, it's very true. Gary's talking about, especially in the Middle Ages, the fall of Rome, and then the descent of civilization into the Dark Ages. There's a wonderful series of books by Thomas Cahill called The Hinges of History. Do you know it? There's 7 of them. I would recommend it. The first one is How the Irish Saved Civilization, not because I'm Irish, but it's how the Irish saved how the Irish saved civilization. Because what happened is the monks on Iona began to collect much of the writings that were being destroyed, rapidly destroyed. There's another one called The Gift of the Jews, which is a beautiful. But what Gary's talking about is that the church for a very long time, I live in a very Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and my neighbor teaches at a yeshiva, and he teaches history. And he said, I have to teach the Middle Ages. And I said, good luck with that, because you can't really talk about the Middle Ages without talking about the Catholic Church, right? Because it was the only stable source of government. So at a time when there was a lot of lawlessness, and even at a time when governments were unstable, depending on on who had the biggest army, right? So what began to happen is the establishment of the monasteries, especially the Benedictine monasteries. Monasticism began in the Eastern Church and then moved over. Even today, we have Del Barton and St. Mary's. A lot of the abbeys still provide education. But so the church, the church became, because of the rule of life, the church became a place of stability. And then, Gary, what happened is that I think, unfortunately, it began to assume temporal authority that never belonged to her. And the problem is that it says in Scripture, you cannot serve God and mammon. So that eventually abbots and bishops became nobility. It became a political, exactly, as opposed to, and that's what happens. And that's what I think, once the church becomes co-opted. But look at this, look even today in the United States. This is the first time in New York that the Cardinal Archbishop there didn't influence a vote around something that was at least important for them to oppose, right? But I think it's an okay place to be. Like, I think that this presumption of temporal authority never belonged to the church. And my roots are in Ireland, and so the Magdalene women in Ireland, right? These, by the way, if you lived in Ireland in that time, and even if you wore too much makeup, and someone in the town decided that you were going to begin to live a lewd life, you would be removed to a convent and maybe never seen again. And if you were pregnant out of wedlock, you were removed to this convent. You had your child, you never saw your child, and you never left the convent. So that kind of theocracy is that's not good for anyone, right? That's just, I mean, who does that? Yeah. By the way, exactly. But if you just apologize. But here's the deal. I don't want to. Can you imagine me being the one to make that decision? Right? Like the parish priest was invested with a lot of authority that didn't belong to him. Does that make sense? One of the things for us in the American National Catholic Church is that for us as well, is we stay out of the bedroom. It doesn't feel like that's the place where the church should be. St. Augustine has taught from the end of the patristics that God speaks to us most profoundly in our own conscience. So not even the church can contradict your conscience. So that you, through an informed conscience, have to make decisions about family planning. You, through an informed conscience, you have to do that. Sure, come talk to me as the priest. Sure, absolutely. follow some moral guidelines, but ultimately the decision is yours. Does that make sense? That's what I think Christ calls us to all of the time, is this degree of maturity. Every time Christ encounters someone who he heals, right? And it's for you and I too. We are never left the same. So he might restore us in our physical capabilities, but more than that, he'll say to us, go and sin no more. Don't do this anymore, right? Do something different. Do something different. So that difference that God is inviting us into is to be the persons that God had created us to be in the first place. I say this all the time because we have a parish council and everybody's Catholic here. So I keep saying, this is your parish. And then they'll say, Father, can we do this? And I keep saying, this is your parish. Right? So don't check your brains at the door. Come here thinking. Come here with all the gifts that God gave you. Ask the questions that you need to ask, right? God's not afraid of our questions. And I think God sometimes is most present in our doubts. That's where God's most present to us, absolutely. So, other things did that help? Yeah. Other questions? Other thoughts?
Not really a question, but maybe you just want to describe the apostolic succession.
Oh, sure. Apostolic succession is a notion that comes from this idea that we are related directly to the apostles. So I'm a bishop. I'm the former bishop of Cameroon in Africa. I'm a Franciscan, and so a bishop shares in the fullness of what we call the fullness of the priesthood of Christ. So when Christ was hanging out with his peeps, right, they were the apostles, right? They were the apostles, and that's he didn't have this idea of priesthood in his mind. There was a Judaic priesthood. The high priest, which was elected, Caiaphas, the high priest we know was high priest when Jesus was crucified. But that changed. And Caiaphas and the high priest was in the line of Zadok. And so they had political, before the Rome conquered them, the high priest had some important political influence in Israel. Much the way it does now, much the way that in a lot of countries the imam or the Ayatollah is, so the high priest, but under Rome, they were subjected to that. So apostolic succession is this, that when Jesus was having his last meal with his friends, the people that he loved, they were all that he really knew. So that the founding of the church is on Calvary, and then the extension of the church is at Pentecost. And so that the Holy Spirit descended as tongues of fire on the people that Jesus knew. Now, because the history is written by the winners and mostly by the men, the apostles were thought to be, the apostles were the 12 men that Jesus chose. But let me assure you that in the upper room was Mary, and Mary, the mother of Clopas, right? There were women there who also received these tongues of fire, right? So as the church grew and developed, the apostles became what Jesus had in mind when he communicated the church to the world. And so they became the model of bishops. So that every bishop, every Catholic bishop has apostolic succession back to one of the apostles. So if I were to show you my certificate of consecration, it's about as tall as I am, and it has my name at the bottom, and then it traces me all the way back to Peter, right? So the bishop who consecrated me, who consecrated him, goes all the way back to Peter. Now, that makes a lot of sense from a very clean historical perspective. But at one point in the church, there were 3 popes, right? So probably my apostolic succession was like, right? But my apostolic succession comes from Rome through Duarte Costa in Brazil, and from the Eastern churches to St. Andrew. St. Andrew is known as the apostle to the Slavs. And so I have apostolic succession through St. Andrew, and I have apostolic succession through St. Peter. So that you can trace my apostolic succession through everybody who consecrated me all the way back. So does that make sense? So that's what we mean by apostolic succession. So apostolic succession is not only top down, it is bottom up. So unless the sensus fidelium, unless the people of God receive that as true, it doesn't mean anything. So I could be bishop of the living room, right? Right? But unless it's received as true. Does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we mean by apostolic succession. That we can, there's a long line and bishops share in the fullness of the priesthood of Christ, so that all of the priests in the American National Catholic Church share in my priesthood. So I give them faculties. They can't operate, no priest can operate without a bishop. So they are, as canon law, they are as a pale ghost without their bishop. So pretty important. Trying to get my family to call me Your Excellency, they won't. They won't do it. They won't do it. So that's so just so you know, right? So that we are in apostolic succession. So we fall in both on both lines. So yeah. Other questions? What we'll do. Many of you I've met with already, right? But some of you I'm going to meet. We have some appointments, and then I'll go over your actually the liturgy of the marriage with you. But I want you to have your marriage, so you don't need my permission for anything. So one bride brought her dog down the aisle. She made me weep because the dog had gone all through undergraduate with her, and she was old, and she was kind of hobbling down the aisle. But I was over. It brought me to tears, honestly. Another bride brought her rabbit down the aisle. So to me, it's what speaks to you, right? And so. I'll say something to you. If you go to the website, you'll see sample of marriages inside and outside of Mass. Use that if you want as planning. But God created this love in you. A sacrament simply acknowledges it. It doesn't create the love. And so the words that we use, the church gives us beautiful language for that. But be at peace about it. So, use, and we'll talk about that. So I always say to people. If you're going to have a rehearsal, let the people who are there do that with you. They're the professionals. There's a joke in seminary. What's the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist? And you can negotiate with a terrorist. So, and I teach liturgy. So I'm a pain in the neck, quite honestly, for people when I go to rehearsals because I want da. So let them walk you in and out. That's fine. And I'm always at your place for your wedding an hour early. And I spend some time with the bride, and so we have a Hail Mary together and stuff like that. So, right, so yeah, so it's nice, right? It's nice. So no fears about that, all right? So it'll be good. So you guys are a quiet group. You're like, right? So the rest of the day is pretty easy. What we'll do is we'll take a little bit of a break, and then you're going to go with Joe and Karen upstairs where it is warmer, I promise. And then we'll come back, we'll celebrate the Eucharist together, and then we'll have some lunch. Just pizza and. Is that okay? Pizza, yeah, nobody's off the carbs. So we'll do pizza and soda. Is that okay? And then your books. So I'll just mention those very quickly. The Decision to Love. Those are for you. I would encourage you. There's a his and a her. So take some time. Did you get one? We'll give you one. Make sure you get one. Make sure go through them. But here's the thing. It's true, Joe. Here's the thing: is the topics there are we argue about little things, leaving the toilet seat up or the cap on the toothpaste, whatever, right? What we fight about are our values, and that's what we fight about. And so, because they're meaningful to us. You have values, each of you. You may not share the same values, or you may not share them to the same intensity. But the reality is that identify where your stuck points might be, right? Sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. In the English, in the English language, there's an important verb, and I learned this when I was studying in Canada. I was assigned to the American parish there. And so it was run by my order. And so I went, and the pastor was away, and he said, would you mind doing the staff meeting for me today? And I was like, yeah, what the heck, right? So I did this staff meeting, and I thought it went all right. I thought it went, and so I got a call about a week later from one of the sisters on the parish staff who was Canadian. And she said to me, she said, George, you have a couple minutes? And I said, sure I do. And she said, yeah, sure I do, right? And she said, that was probably the liveliest meeting we've ever had here. Canadians are interesting folks. I love them. And I remember saying something in class, and one of my classmates was Canadian. He's like, "You're so bold." And I was like, "Bold?" And he's like, "Yeah, we're Canadian. We just kind of suffer in silence." I was like, "Really?" So anyway, so they're just a little lower energy than we are. But anyway, so I had this meeting, and she said to me, she said, "This was probably the most exciting meeting that I was ever at here at St. Joan of Arc, St. John d'Arc." And I said, "Oh, how come?" She said, "Well," she said, "you were just very lively," and she said, "You really pushed some things through." I didn't think that I did. And she said, "Well, let me ask you something." She said, "How was your country formed?" And I was like, "What?" She said, "Well, in the United States, how was your country formed?" I said, "Oh, we had a revolution, and being Irish, I said, we threw off the stick of British." And she's like, "Yeah." She said, "Canada was formed by 7 men sitting around a table. That's how Canada was formed. They formed Canada." And she said, "What's your country's flag? What does that mean?" And I was like, "Oh, it's stars and stripes on a field of," and she said, "Yeah, pretty much represents some historic sense of having to earn or win your freedom through blood." She said, "Yeah." She said, "Our flag is it's a maple syrup label. It's right. It's a right?" And then she said to me, she said, "What's the animal symbol of your country?" And I said, "It's the American eagle." And she said, "Yeah, it's a predator." I guess. So I'm not sure where she was going with this. And she said, "Our national animal is a beaver, who, when it's challenged, runs to a corner and chews its genitals." Okay, well that's a little more information than I wanted to know, right? And then she said, "Judy," I said, "I'm not sure what this is about." She said, "I just want to say something to you." She said that Canadians, although we speak the same language, we also understand that compromise is a really important way to function with each other. And I got it right away. I was not compromising with anybody at that table during the meeting. I really wasn't, right? And that's sometimes our American mentality, right? We just push and we push and we push. So it's not going to work in marriage, right? That's not going to work, right? So compromise, remember that. Remember that story, right? You'll probably remember the beaver piece. That's what I So, so what we'll do, let's take a little bit of a break, and then Karen and Joe go upstairs with you, and you get to ask them any questions you want. Does that make sense? And then we'll come back here, we'll do a little debriefing, have mass, and then we'll have lunch. All right? All right, good. Yeah.